I'm having one more cup of cocoa. 1:45. So I just thought I would read one more chapter, since I want to hear how the wind in the keyhole actually starts. Because this wind in the keyhole, so far we've read how they got to this old building in the middle of a storm, this old stone building. And now Roland's going to tell the story that he remembers from when he was little, that he just remembered. Took him a while. The Skin Man, Part 1. Not long after the death of my mother, which, as you know, came by my own hand, my father, Stephen, it was an accident. I could dig it up somewhere, the details. No, I gave that book away. I could look it up. My father, Stephen, son of Henry the Tall, summoned me to his study in the north wing of the palace. It was a small, cold room. I remember the wind whining around the slit windows. I remember the high, frowning shelves of books. Worth a fortune they were, but never read. That sounds familiar. Not by him, anyway. And I remember the black collar of mourning he wore. It was the same as my own. Every man in Gilead wore the same collar, or a band around his shirt sleeve. The women wore black nets on their hair. This would go on until Gabrielle Deschain was 6 months in her tomb. Gabrielle, sorry. His father is Stephen, his mother was Gabrielle. I saluted him, fist to forehead. He didn't look up from the papers on his desk, but I knew he saw it. My father saw everything, and very well. I waited. He signed his name several times while the wind whistled, and the rooks cawed in the courtyard. The fireplace was a dead socket. He rarely called for it to be lit, even on the coldest days. At last he looked up. "How is court, Roland?" Court like a name, like capital C-O-R-T. "How goes it with your teacher that was? You must know, because I've been given to understand that you spend most of your time in his hut, feeding him and such." "He has days when he knows me," I said. "Many days he doesn't. He still sees a little from one eye. The other, I didn't need to finish. The other was gone. My hawk, David, had taken it from him in my test of manhood. Court, in turn, had taken David's life, but that was to be his last kill. I know what happened to his other peep." My father said, "Do you truly feed him?" "Aye, father, I do." "Do you clean him when he messes?" I stood there before his desk, like a chastened schoolboy called before the master, and that is how I felt. Only how many chastened schoolboys have killed their own mothers? "Answer me, Roland. I am your din, as well as your father, and I'd have your answer." "Sometimes." He's asking him if he cleans the old man when he pisses himself. "Sometimes," which was not really a lie. "Sometimes I changed his dirty clouts 3 and 4 times a day, sometimes on the good days, only once or not at all. He could get to the jakes if I helped him, and if he remembered he had to go." "Does he not have the white ammies who come in?" "I sent them away," I said. He looked at me with real curiosity. I searched for contempt in his face. Part of me wanted to see it, but there was none that I could tell. Did I raise you to the gun so you could become an Ammy and nurse a broken old man? I felt my anger flash at that. Court had raised a moit of boys to the tradition of the eld and the way of the gun. Those who were unworthy he had bested in combat and sent west with no weapons other than what remained of their wits. There, in Cretia, and places even deeper in those anarchic kingdoms, many of those broken boys had joined with Farson, the good man, who would in time overthrow everything my father's line had stood for. Farson, the good man, like capital G, capital M, like a title. Farson had armed them, sure. He had guns, and he had plans. Would you throw him on the dung-heap, father? Is that to be his reward for all his years of service? Who next, then? Vinay? Never in this life, as you know. But done is done, Roland, as thee also knows. And thee doesn't nurse him out of love. Thee knows that, too. I nurse him out of respect. If 'twas only respect, I think you'd visit him and read to him, for you read well. Your mother always said so, and about that she spoke true. But you'd not clean his shit and change his bed. You are scourging yourself for the death of your mother, which was not your fault. Part of me knew this was true. Part of me refused to believe it. The publishment of her death was simple. Gabrielle Deschain, she of Arton, died while possessed of a demon, which troubled her spirit. It was always put so when someone of high blood committed suicide, and so the story of her death was given. It was accepted without question, even by those who had, either secretly or not so secretly, cast their lot with Farson. Complicated already, huh? Because it became known, gods know how, not from me or my friends, that she had become the consort of Martin Broadcloak, the court magi's and my father's chief adviser, and that Martin had fled west, alone. Roland, hear me very well. I know you felt betrayed by your lady mother. So did I. I know that part of you hated her. Part of me hated her too. But we both also loved her and love her still. You were poisoned by the toy you brought back from mages, and you were tricked by the witch. One of those things alone might not have caused what happened, but the pink ball and the witch together, Rhea, I could feel tears stinging my eyes, and I willed them back. I would not weep before my father, never again. Rhea of the Coos, I said. Aye, she, the black-haired cunt. It was she who killed your mother, Roland. She turned you into a gun, and then pulled the trigger. I said nothing. He must have seen my distress, because he resumed shuffling his papers, signing his name here and there. Finally he raised his head again. The Ammies will have to see to court for a while. I'm sending you and one of your commates to Debaria. What? To Serenity? He laughed. The retreat where your mother stayed? Yes. Not there, not at all. Serenity, what a joke. Those women are the black Ammies. They'd flay you alive if you so much as trespassed their holy doors. Most of the sisters who bide there prefer the long stick to a man. I had no idea what he meant. Remember, I was still very young and very innocent about many things, in spite of all I'd been through. I'm not sure I'm ready for another mission, Father, let alone a quest. He looked at me coldly. I'll be the judge of what you're ready for. Besides, this is nothing like the mess you walked into in Medjez. There may be danger, it may even come to shooting, but at bottom, it's just a job that needs to be done. Partly so that people who've come to doubt can see that the white, capital W, is still strong and true, but mostly because what's wrong cannot be allowed to stand. Besides, as I've said, I won't be sending you alone. Who'll go with me? Cuthbert or Elaine? Neither. I have worked for Laughing Boy and Thudfoot right here. You go with Jamie DeCurry. I considered this and thought I would be glad to ride with Jamie Redhand, although I would have preferred either Cuthbert or Elaine, as my father surely knew. Will you go without argument, or will you annoy me farther on a day when I have much to do? I'll go, I said. In truth, it would be good to escape the palace, its shadowy rooms, its whispers of intrigue, its pervasive sense that darkness and anarchy were coming and nothing could stop them. The world would move on, but Gilead would not move on with it. That glittering, beautiful bubble would soon burst. Good, you're a fine son, Roland. I may never have told you that, but it's true. I hold nothing against you, nothing. I lowered my head. When this meeting was finally over, I would go somewhere and let my heart free, but not just then, not as I stood before him. 10 or 12 wheels beyond the Hall of the Women, Serenity, or whatever they call it, is the town of Debaria itself, on the edge of the Alkali Flats. Nothing serene about Debaria. It's a dusty, hide-smelling railhead town where cattle and black salt are shipped south, east, and north in every direction, except the one where that bastard Farson's laying his plans. There are fewer trail drive herds these days, and I expect Debaria will dry up and blow away like so many other places in Midworld before long, but now it's still a busy place, full of saloons, whore dens, gamblers, and confidence men. Hard as it might be to believe, there are even a few good people there. One is the High Sheriff, Hugh Peavy. It's him that you and DeCurry will report to. Let him see your guns and a sigil, which I will give you, a sigil, which I will give you. Do you ken everything I've told you so far? Yes, father, I said. What's so bad there that it warrants the attention of gunslingers? I smiled a little, a thing I had done seldom in the wake of my mother's death. Even baby gunslingers such as us. According to the reports I have, he lifted some of the papers and shook them at me. There's a skin man at work. I have my doubts about that, but there's no doubt the folk are terrified. I don't know what that is, I said. Some sort of shape changer, or so the old tales say. Go to Vinay when you leave me. He's been collecting reports. All right. Do the job. Find this lunatic who goes around wearing animal skins. It's probably what it amounts to. But be not long about it. Matters far graver than this have begun to teeter. I'd have you back, you and all your comrades, before they fall. The things that are teetering are going to fall. 2 days later, Jamie and I led our horses onto the stable car of a special 2-car train that had been laid on for us. Once the Western Line ran 1,000 wheels or more all the way to the Mohane Desert, but in the years before Gilead fell, it went to Debaria and no farther. Beyond there, many track lines had been destroyed by washouts and ground shakers. Earthquakes. Oh. Others of the old rail lines, others had been taken up by harriers and roving bands of outlaws who called themselves land pirates, for that part of the world had fallen into bloody confusion. We called those far western lands Outworld, and they served John Farson's purposes well. He was, after all, just a land pirate himself, one with pretensions. Paragliding. So John Farson's a pretentious land pirate? The train was little more than a steam-driven toy. Gilead folk called it Sma-Toot and laughed to see it puffing over the bridge to the west of the palace. We could have ridden faster a horseback, but the train saved the mounts, and the dusty velveteen seats of our car folded out into beds, which we felt as the fine thing. Until we tried to sleep in them, that was. At one particularly hard jounce, Jamie was thrown right off his makeshift bed and onto the floor. Cuthbert would have laughed, and Alain would have cursed, but Jamie Redhand only picked himself up, stretched out again, and went back to sleep. We spoke little that first day, only looked out the wavery isinglass windows, watching as Gilead's green and forested land gave way to dirty scrub, a few struggling ranches, and herders' huts. There were a few towns where folk, many of them Uties, gaped at us as Sma-Toot we slowly passed. A few pointed at the centers of their foreheads, as if at an invisible eye. It meant they stood for Farson, the good man. In Gilead, such folk would have been imprisoned for their disloyalty, but Gilead was now behind us. I was dismayed by how quickly the allegiance of these people, once taken for granted, had thinned. On the first day of our journey, outside Biesforden, whatever. First day of our journey outside Biesforden, Arten, where a few of my mother's people still lived, a fat man threw a rock at the train. It bounced off the closed stable car door, and I heard our horses whinny in surprise. The fat man saw us looking at him. He grinned, grabbed his crotch with both hands, and waddled away. "Someone has eaten well in a poor land," Jamie remarked as we watched his butters jounce in the seat of his old patch pants. The following morning, after the servant had put a cold breakfast of porridge and milk before us, Jamie said, "I suppose you'd better tell me what it's about." "Will you tell me something first? If you know, that is?" "Of course." "My father said that the women at the retreat in Debaria prefer the long stick to a man. Do you know what he meant?" Jamie regarded me in silence for a bit, as if to make sure I wasn't shaking his knee, and then his lips twitched at the corners. For Jamie, this was the equivalent of holding his belly, rolling around the floor, and howling with glee. Which Cuthbert Allgood certainly would have done. "It must be what the whores in the Low Town call a diddlestick. Does that help?" "Truly? And they, what? Use it on each other?" "So 'tis said, but much talk is just la la la. You know more of women than I do, Roland. I've never lain with one. But never mind. Given time, I suppose I will. Tell me whereabout in Debaria." A skin man is supposedly terrorizing the good folk, probably the bad folk as well. A man who becomes some sort of animal? It was actually a little more complicated in this case, but he had the nub of it. The wind was blowing hard, flinging handfuls of alkali at the side of the car. After one particularly vicious gust, the little train lurched. Our empty porridge bowls slid. We caught them before they could fall. If we hadn't been able to do such things, and without even thinking of them, we would not have been fit to carry the guns we wore. Not that Jamie preferred the gun. Given a choice, and the time to make it, he would reach for either his bow or his ba. B-A-H, I don't know what that is. "My father doesn't believe it," I said, "but Vinay does. At that moment, we were thrown forward into the seats ahead of us. The old servant, who was coming down the center aisle to retrieve our bowls and cups, was flung all the way back to the door between the car and his little kitchen. His front teeth flew out of his mouth and into his lap, which gave me a start. Jamie ran up the aisle, which was now severely tilted, and knelt by him. As I joined him, Jamie plucked up the teeth, and I saw they were made of painted wood and held together by a cunning clip almost too small to see. "Are you all right, Si?" Jamie asked. The old fellow got slowly to his feet, took his teeth, and filled the hole behind his upper lip with them. "I'm fine, but this dirty bitch has derailed again." "They're filthy speakers." Ugh. "No more DeBaria runs for me. I have a wife. She's an old nag, and I'm determined to outlive her. You young men had better check your horses. With luck, neither of them will have broken a leg." Ooh. Neglected train tracks, I guess. Neither had, but they were nervous and stamping, anxious to get out of their confinement. We lowered the ramp and tethered them to the connecting bar between the two cars, where they stood with their heads lowered and their ears flattened against the hot and gritty wind blowing out of the west. Then we clambered back inside the passenger car and collected our gunna. The engineer, a broad-shouldered, bow-legged plug of a man, came down the side of his listing train with the old servant in tow. When he reached us, he pointed to what we could see very well. "Yonder on that ridge be DeBaria High Road. See the marking posts. You can be at the place o' the females in less than an hour, but don't bother asking none of those bitches, because you won't get it." He lowered his voice. "They eat men, is what I've heard. Not just a way of speaking, boys. They eat the men." Shorthand. I found it easier to believe in the reality of the skin man than this. But I said nothing. It was clear that the NG was shaken up, and one of his hands was as red as Jamie's. But the NG's was only a little burn and would go away. Jamie's would still be red when he was sent down to his grave. It looked as if it had been dipped in blood. They may call to you, or make promises. They may even show you their titties, as they know a young man can't take his eyes off such. But never mind. Turn your ears from their promises and your eyes from their titties. You must go on into the town. It'll be less than another hour by horse. We'll need a work crew to put this poxy whore upright. I guess he's calling the train a whore. The rails are fine, I checked. Just covered with that damned alkali dust is all. I suppose ye can't pay men to come out, but if ye can write, as I suppose such gentle fellows as yourselves surely can, you can give 'em a promissory note, or whatever it's called. We have specie, I said, enough to hire a small crew. The NG's eyes widened at this. I suppose they would widen even more if I told him my father had given me 20 gold knuckles to carry in a special pocket sewn inside my vest. And oxes? Because we'll need oxes if they've got 'em. Hosses if they don't. Oxes. "We'll go to the livery and see what they have," I said, mounting up. Oh, hosses, horses. Hosses if they don't. "Go to the livery and see what they have," I said, mounting up. Jamie tied his bow on one side of his saddle and then moved to the other, where he slid his ba into the leather boot his father had made special for it. "Don't leave us stuck out here, young Si," the NG said. "We've no horses and no weapons." "We won't forget you," I said. "Just stay inside. If we can't get a crew out today, we'll send a bucka to take you into town." "Thank ye. And stay away from those women. They eat the mince." The day was hot. We ran the horses for a bit because they wanted to stretch after being pent up, then pulled them down to a walk. "Vinay," Jamie said. "Pardon?" "Before the train derailed, you said your father didn't believe there was a skin man, but Vinay does. He said that after reading the reports High Sheriff Peavy sent along. It was hard not to believe. You know what he says at least once in every class? When facts speak, the wise man listens. 23 dead makes a moit of facts. Not shot or stabbed, mind you, but torn to pieces." Jamie grunted. "Whole families in 2 cases, large ones, almost clans. The houses turned all upsy-turvy and splashed with blood. Limbs ripped off the bodies and carried away, some found, partly eaten, some not. Oh, I know a place like that. At one of those farms, Sheriff Peavy and his deputy found the youngest boy's head stuck on a fence pole with his skull smashed in and his brain scooped out." "Witnesses?" "A few. A sheepherder coming back with strays saw his partner attacked. The one who survived was on a nearby hill. The 2 dogs with him ran down to try and protect their other master and were torn apart too. The thing came up the hill after the herder, but got distracted by the sheep instead, so the fellow struck lucky and got away. He said it was a wolf that ran upright, like a man. Then there was a woman with a gambler. He was caught cheating at Watch Me in one of the local pits. The 2 of them were given a bill of circulation and told to leave town by nightfall or be whipped. They were headed for the little town near the salt mines when they were beset. The man fought. It gave the woman just enough time to get clear. She hid up in some rocks until the thing was gone. She said 'twas a lion." "On its back legs?" "If so, she didn't wait to see. Last two cowpunchers. They were camped on Debaria Stream near a young Manny couple on marriage retreat, although the punchers didn't know it until they heard the couple's screams. As they rode toward the sound, they saw the killer go loping off with the woman's lower leg in its jaws. It wasn't a man, but they swore on watch and warrant that it ran upright like a man." Jamie leaned over the neck of his horse and spat. "Can't be so. Vinay says it can. He says there have been such before, although not for years. He believes they may be some sort of mutation that's pretty much worked its way out of the true thread. All these witnesses saw different animals?" "Aye. The cowpokes describe it as a tiger. It had stripes. Lions and tigers running around like trained beasts in a traveling show. And out here in the dust. Are you sure you aren't being tickled?" I wasn't old enough to be sure of much, but I did know the times were too desperate to be sending young guns even so far west as Debaria for a prank. Not that Stephen Deschain could have been described as a prankster even in the best of times. I'm only telling what Vinay told me. The rope swingers who came into town, with the remains of those two Manny behind them on a travois, had never heard of such a thing as a tiger. Yet that is what they described. The testimony's in here, green eyes and all. I took the 2 creased sheets of paper I had from Vinay out of my inner vest pocket. Care to look? I'm not much of a reader, Jamie said. As thee knows. Aye, fine. But take my word, their description is just like the picture in the old story of the boy caught in the Stark blast. What old story is that? The one about Tim Stoutheart, the wind through the keyhole. Never mind. It's not important. I know the punchers may have been drunk. They usually are if they're near a town that has liquor. But if it's true testimony, Vinay says the creature is a shapeshifter as well as a shape changer. 23 dead, you say? Aye, aye. The wind gusted, driving the alkali before it. The horses shied, and we raised our neckerchiefs over our mouths and noses. Boogery hot, said Jamie. In this damn dust. Then, as if realizing he had been excessively chatty, he fell silent. That was fine with me, as I had much to think about. A little less than an hour later, we breasted a hill and saw a sparkling white hachi below us. It was the size of a barony estate. Behind it, tending down toward a narrow creek, was a large green garden and what looked like a grape arbor. My mouth watered at the sight of it. The last time I'd had grapes, my armpits had still been smooth and hairless. Tough times. The walls of the hachi were tall and topped with forbidding sparkles of broken glass. But the wooden gates stood open as if an invitation. In front of them, seated on a kind of throne, was a woman in a dress of white muslin and a hood of white silk that flared around her head like gull wings. As we drew closer, I saw the throne was ironwood. Surely no other chair, not made of metal, could have borne her weight, for she was the biggest woman I had ever seen, a giantess who could have mated with the legendary outlaw Prince David Quick. Her lap was full of needlework. She might have been knitting a blanket, but held before that barrel of a body and breasts so big each of them could have fully shaded a baby from the sun. Whatever it was looked no bigger than a handkerchief. She caught sight of us, laid her work aside, and stood up. There was 6.5 feet of her, maybe a bit more. That's not so huge. Giantess. It's ridiculous. Basketball player's bigger than that. The wind was less in this dip, but there was enough to flutter her dress against her long thighs. The cloth made a sound like a sail in a running breeze. I remember the NG saying, "They eat the men's." But when she put one large fist to the broad plane of her forehead and lifted the side of her dress to dip a curtsy with her free hand, I nonetheless reined up. "Heil, gunslingers," she called. She had a rolling voice, not quite a man's baritone. "In the name of serenity and the women who bide here, I salute thee. May your days be long upon the earth." We raised our own fists to our brows and wished her twice the number. "Have you come from in-world?" "I think so, for your duds aren't filthy enough for these parts, although they will be if you bide longer than a day." She laughed. The sound was moderate thunder. "We do come from in-world, that is." I said. It was clear Jamie would say nothing. Ordinary closed mouth, he was now stunned to silence. Her shadow rose on the whitewashed wall behind her, as tall as Lord Perth. I know, he came from, like you said, his dad's father or grandfather was like Henry the Tall or some crap. I know he was taller than 6'5". Unless they're all like itty bitty. Maybe 6'5" is huge for them. Whatever. What was that other guy's name? Rasputin. How tall was Rasputin? I don't know. "And have you come for the skin man?" It's the lady asking. "Yes," I said. "Have you seen him, or do you only know of him from the talk? If that's the case, we'll move on and say thank ye." "Not a him, lad. Never think it." I only looked at her. Standing, she was almost tall enough to look into my eyes. And he's on a horse, I think. Although I sat on young Joe, a fine big horse. "And it," she said, "a monster from the deep cracks. As sure as you two serve the eld and the white, it may have been a man once, but no more." "Yes, I've seen it, and seen its work. And sit where you are, never move, and you shall see its work too." Without waiting for any reply, she went through the open gate. In her white muslin, she was like a sloop running before the wind. I looked at Jamie. He shrugged and nodded. This was what we had come for, after all, and if the NG had to wait a bit longer for helping put Smud Toot back on the rails, so be it. "Ellen!" she bawled, raised to full volume. It was like listening to a woman shouting into an electric megaphone. "Clemmy, Brianna, bring food, bring meat and bread and ale. The light, not the dark. Bring a table, and mind you don't forget the cloth. Send Fortuna to me now. Hie to it, double quick." With these orders delivered, she returned to us, delicately lifting her hem to keep it out of the alkali that puffed around the black boats she wore on her enormous feet. "Lady Sigh, we thank you for your offer of hospitality, but we really must—" "You must eat is what you must do," she said. "We'll have it out here a roadside, so your digestion will not be discomposed. For I know what stories they tell about us in Gilead, aye, so do we all. Men tell the same about any woman who dare to live on their own, I wot. It makes them doubt the worth of their hammers. We heard no stories about... She laughed and her bosom heaved like the sea. Polite of you, young gunny, aye, and very snick, but it's long since I was weaned. Will not eat ye. Her eyes, as black as her shoes, twinkled. Although ye'd make a tasty snack, I think. One or both. I am Everline of Serenity, the prioress, by the grace of God and the man Jesus. That's interesting. Roland of Gilead, I said. And this is Jamie of Same. Ooh. Jamie bowed from his saddle. She curtsied to us again, this time dropping her head so that the wings of her silken hood closed briefly around her face like curtains. As she rose, a tiny woman glided through the open gate. Or perhaps she was of normal size after all. Perhaps she only looked tiny next to Everline. Her robe was rough gray cotton instead of white muslin. Her arms were crossed over her scant bosom, and her hands were buried deep in her sleeves. She wore no hood, but we could still see only half of her face. The other half was hidden beneath a thick swath of bandagement. She curtsied to us, then huddled in the considerable shade of her prioress. Raise your head, Fortuna, and make your manners to these young gentlemen. When at last she looked up, I saw why she had kept her head lowered. The bandages could not fully conceal the damage to her nose. On the right side, a good part of it was gone. Where it had been was only a raw red channel. Heil, she whispered, may your days be long upon the earth. May you have twice the number, Jamie said. And I saw from the woeful glance she gave him, with her one visible eye, that she hoped this was not true. Tell them what happened, Everline said. What you remember, any Rue. I know 'twasn't much. Must I, Mother? Yes, she said, for they've come to end it. Fortuna peered doubtfully at us, just a quick snatch of a glance, and then back at Everline. Can they? They look so young. She realized what she had said must sound impolite, and a flush colored the cheek we could see. She staggered a little on her feet, and Everline put an arm around her. It was clear that she had been badly hurt, and her body was still far from complete recovery. The blood that had run to her face had more important work to do in other parts of her body. Chiefly beneath the bandage, I suppose, but given the voluminous robe she wore, it was impossible to tell where else she might have been wounded. They may still be a year or more from having to shave but once a week, but they're gunslingers. 40. If they can't see this cursed town right, they can't set this cursed town right. Then no one can. Besides, it will do you good. Horror's a worm that needs to be coughed out before it breeds. Now tell them." She told. As she did, other sisters of serenity came out, carrying a table, the others carrying food and drink to fill it. Better viands than any we had, on Sma too, by the look and the smell. Yet by the time Fortuna had finished her short, terrible story, I was no longer hungry. Nor, by the look of him, was Jamie. It was dusk, a fortnight and a day gone. She and another, Dolores, had come out to close the gate and draw water for the evening chores. Fortuna was the one with the bucket, and so she was the one who lived. Oh, this is the story of what happened to her. It was dusk, a fortnight and a day gone, but before. She and another, Dolores, had come out to close the gate and draw water for the evening chores. Fortuna was the one with the bucket, and so she was the one who lived. As Dolores began to swing the gate closed, a creature knocked it wide, grabbed her, and bit her head from her shoulders with its long jaws. Fortuna said that she saw it well, for the peddler's moon had just risen full in the sky. Taller than a man it was, with scales instead of skin, and a long tail that dragged behind it on the ground. Yellow eyes with slitted dark pupils glowed in its flat head. Its mouth was a trap filled with teeth, each as long as a man's hand. They dripped with Dolores's blood as it dropped her still twitching body on the cobbles of the courtyard and ran on its stubby legs toward the well where Fortuna stood. I turned to flee. It caught me, and I remember no more. "I do," Everlyn said grimly. "I heard the screams and came running out with our gun. It's a great long thing with the bell at the end of the barrel. It's been loaded since time out of mind, but none of us has ever fired it. For all I knew, it could have blown up in my hands. But I saw it tearing at poor Forty's face, and then something else too. When I did, I never thought of the risk. I never even thought that I might kill her, poor thing, as well as it, should the gun fire." "I wish you had killed me," Fortuna said. "Oh, I wish you had." She sat in one of the chairs that had been brought to the table,